Hey, geeks and geekettes, it's Chuck Dixon, your comic book pal, back to answer your questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. And as I promised in the last video, I'm not going to do these videos with necessarily a weekly frequency all the time from here on out, but I will do longer episodes. Or at least try to do longer episodes, or maybe just talk really slow. Well, to that end, I've assembled a much larger panoply, if you will, of questions to answer. Questions from you, my loyal viewers, and I appreciate every single one. We're going to start out with not a question, but a picture. Damian Fields was kind enough to send us a picture of his dog, Bear. Half jokingly, in recent videos, I asked you to, in addition to questions and comments, if you wanted to send me a picture of your dog, and a few of you have. And what can you say to this this picture except, good boy? Kevin Cruz. I must find myself in disagreement with one statement you said in your latest episode of ACD number 99. Look, where it's just beginning and we're already having a problem. I think as a writer that finding the pain inside a character is a good idea to develop it. That way we have a starting point or a motivation to do their things. A great example is Batman, whose pain of losing his family is what motivates him to fight crime in the first place, or Punisher, who pretty much has the same origin but goes about it a different way. In finding the pain, we can also find a way to combat it and solve our inner issues. That, in my book, can be an aspirational aspect, seeing someone in fiction that could find it in them to forgive an offense done to them, or face a fear caused by trauma and overcome it. I'm not saying I 100% that I disagree 100% with you, but I beg you not to dismiss this form of character development as a valid one. Well, yeah, I mean, pain or trauma is generally part of the origin of a lot of these heroes. I mean, going all the way back to mythology, not to go all Joseph Campbell on you. But I think to emphasize it all the time or to revisit it constantly is, I don't think it's necessarily helpful. I don't think it really helps build the character. Most of us know that Superman's an orphan, and Batman's an orphan, and Harry Potter's an orphan, and Tarzan's an orphan, and Spider-Man's an orphan, and, you don't need to lean into it constantly. It's just part of their background, and we all understand that. But to have them mope around all the time, that's not fun either. I think we've all known people who have had trauma in their past, and they either deal with it by wallowing in it, which isn't heroic at all, or aspirational or inspirational. And there are others who not get over it, but because, you don't get over trauma. I mean, it's a cold heart that says you should just cope with this. You just get over it. You can't, because trauma, I think, affects changes in your lizard brain. And as I get older, I realize that these traumas don't go away. Sometimes they sharpen or they resurface at unexpected times. Trauma is a lifelong process, much like grief. You don't get over it. It doesn't end. You learn to deal with it. You learn to move on. But it's always in the background. But that said, you can't have the characters react to everything according to what happened to them in the past. We've all met people who've had trauma in their lives, as I said. But there are some people you meet and you had no idea they had trauma in their lives until you learn more about them. I met people who were Holocaust survivors, and I didn't know they were Holocaust survivors, or had, I've met soldiers who have had horrible things happen to them in war, but you didn't know that from their current personality. They were upbeat and happy and outgoing, and it wasn't until they talked about the events of their past that maybe some of that pain came through. But in some instances, I remember talking to a guy who was a member of the Marine Force Recon in World War II, and his job was to land on the beach before the beaches of Japanese-held islands before the invasion force. This guy saw some really nasty stuff and engaged in some really nasty stuff in defense of his country. And yet, I'd known the guy for years before that, had no idea. No idea. There was nothing in his personality at the time that would even suggest that he had these kind of traumatic events in his past. They had to be traumatic. But even when relating them, not going into any kind of detail or anything like that, I didn't psychoanalyze the guy. But even going into detail about them, his personality didn't change, So you have to look at the whole person. And I mean, to give you an example, I met someone once who was in therapy, and they told me that they were talking about their therapy because for some reason people who go to a lot of therapy want to tell everybody about their therapy. It's like people that went to Harvard. You've got to know they went to Harvard. And this person said that, mentioned casually in passing, that their therapist was a Holocaust survivor. And I'm like, how does that work? How do you sit and complain about your little problems, about being shortchanged at Starbucks or somebody taking a parking spot away from you, to someone who was in a concentration camp? I mean, God bless their therapist that they could have gone through that in their life and still sit and take seriously the relatively petty little problems of their clientele. But I said, if I went to a therapist and I learned that they were a Holocaust survivor, I would go, you know what? I got nothing to say. I don't really have any problems worth relating to you because, my God, you're a Holocaust survivor. That, to me alone, that would be the one and only therapy session I would need to find out that this working professional, this person who with an outgoing enough personality and a caring enough personality to go into psychotherapy and become a therapist was sitting across the room from me. I would go, what? What am I doing here? What problems do I have? And I would, pay for the hour and walk out. Back when I was a kid, I watched an interview on television with Zero Mostel, the actor. I was a weird kid. I watched this lengthy interview with Zero Mostel and was fascinated. And one of the things that I remember, well, actually the only thing I remember from the interview, I saw this interview when I was like 9. The one thing I remember, the one thing that stayed with me, was when he talked about playing a character and playing a well-rounded character. And he used the example of Willy Loman in Death of a Salesman. And at the time Mostel was being interviewed, Lee J. Cobb was like ripping it up on Broadway as Willy Loman. And Mostel criticized Cobb's performance, which was, well lauded, and he won all kinds of awards for it and everything else. Lee J. Cobb's career highlight, playing Willy Loman on Broadway. But Zero Mostel had problems with it, and he said that one of them was that, his Loman was just moped around on stage the entire time. He didn't give you any glimpse into another life he might have had before the story began, or any other facet of his personality. Zero Mostel said that were he to play Willy Loman, I'm not sure if he ever did, were he to play Willy Loman, he would mine the play's material for some glimpse of humor, some glimpse of a little bit of optimism. Because Willy Loman is a man whose all of his optimism has been crushed. But Mostel said we should still see some evidence of the man he once was. And I think, that answers your question. We need to see all aspects of the human condition, all aspects of the character's personality, not just, something horrible happened to me and every day I think about it and everything I do reacts to that. I know that's not what you're saying, but there's a danger there. There's the gravitational pull of the character's origin to always return back to that and make them dour and grim and remorseful all the time. I don't want to read about characters like that. I really don't think anybody else does either. It's what someone recently told me is called misery porn, and I'm not into it. Dan Jeffries, near the end of your run on the Detective Monthly, you wrote a story in which Batman and Bane have a rematch, and Batman is the winner this time. Did you always intend for Batman to defeat Bane after Nightfall, or was Bane supposed to be the one villain Batman never beat? He was on a redemptive path for a while, after all, in his own mind. Did the possibility of a future writer having Batman defeat Bane influence you to write that yourself first? Now, it wasn't just me; it was the whole Batman team. And the idea being that, we wanted to write Batman's the rematch, basically. We don't want to portray Batman as a loser, that there was this character that he couldn't defeat. That just doesn't work for Batman. So we knew that we would be returning to have the two of them go head to head once again. And actually, I got these out of order. And fight once again, and Batman come out on top. So that was always the plan, even from Nightfall, that these two would meet again, and Batman would be triumphant, because that's what the readers wanted. That's what we wanted. We weren't going to leave them undefeated. And it's not a matter of we did it because we didn't want some other writers doing it down the road. The rematch was baked into Nightfall from the beginning. And if any of you recall it, it was called Legacy, the story in which Batman and Bane meet once again, and Batman kicks Bane's ass. So, that's just the natural progression of the story. We had to do it because readers demanded it, and we wanted it, and it was the natural progression of the storyline. But Graham and I brought Batman and Bane full circle, from Batman losing to Batman winning to the two of them uniting for an adventure. If you've ever read Bane Conquest, you'll see that there was ample reason for Batman and Bane to ally for a short while because they had a common goal. So Graham and I saw that as something that we always wanted to get to in the story. That's something that he and I, Mr. Nolan and myself, saw as a further natural extension of the Nightfall storyline. And I'm glad we got to accomplish that in our final project for DC. Little sip of tea. And on to Kenny Todd. Hope you and your family are well. They are. You talked about Alien Legion and the Predator Planet in Chuck Dixon 101. It got me to thinking, Legion of Superheroes, Alien Legion crossover. I'm a crossover fiend and have a lot of them. Some of them were a stretch, like Superman Predator, Batman Aliens, Vampirella Aliens. Some of them were gold. Your Batman Punisher, Superman Aliens by Jurgens, and the sequel by yourself and John Bogdanov, and Judge Dredd Batman. Would you do, if asked, would I do the Alien Legion of Superheroes crossover, if asked? If I had a co-writer, because I don't know much about Legion of Superheroes. It's not a comic I read when I was a kid. I never read it. I never had any interest in it. There were too many characters. It seemed too complex. It didn't engage me. No, the only kid I knew growing up who read it every month, was a big fan, was my elementary school buddy Joel Hess. But Joel had a genius IQ. I think that's what it required to follow Legion of Superheroes with any kind of, understanding of what the hell was going on. The charm of it escaped me, but it would be a natural fit for them to meet Alien Legion. Hey, why not? But as I said, I'd want a co-writer. I'll bet you Carl Kiesel is a Legion of Superheroes fan, and he and I work well together. That would be cool to team up with, in some imaginary universe, Carl Kiesel and I team up to do a Alien Legion of Superheroes crossover. I think that would be fun. But I love crossovers too. So yeah, I would probably say yes, but with that caveat. Okay, Brian Rickard. This is a first. He's got a question that takes 2 screens. I recently read your 2-issue Green Lantern New Corps story and felt I received a complete and satisfying narrative in only 2 parts. If this story were being told today by current DC talent, there's a high probability it would have taken at least 6 issues to do what you were able to accomplish in 2, and I'm sure that wouldn't have improved the pacing or impact of the story. My question is that since decompressing a story into multiple issues, particularly ones that aren't selling that well in the modern market, doesn't seem like it could be cost-saving measure for publishers, as they still have to pay for the same amount of art and scripts. What is behind the recent trend of extreme decompression in modern comics? Well, first off, Green Lantern New Corps was a prestige mini. I think that they were extra length issues. So, and it was proposed to me by Kevin Dooley, who was then the Green Lantern editor. I forget why, but in the monthly storyline, Kyle Rayner is banished from Earth or something, or lost or whatever. And Kevin wanted a story of what happens to him in that time period. So these issues occur in continuity with the monthly issue, but outside of the action of the monthly issue. And initially, it's funny you talk about decompression, because initially this was supposed to be 3 issues. And what I did was I divided it up into Kyle assembling this team of new Green Lanterns, and then having adventures with them in a second issue, and then a subplot that began in the first issue turns into the main plot by the 3rd issue and is resolved. But partway through writing issue 1, Kevin changed his mind. Kevin changed his mind a lot in the middle of projects, and he would change his mind, change artists. He worried. He was a worrier. He is a worrier probably to this day, but he would worry that how it was going to be received, how it would sell. So he decided the best thing to do was to cut our losses and reduce it from 3 issues to 2. And so I just cut out the middle portion where they have a series of their own adventures to basically establish the cohesiveness of the team. And so we just jumped from basically, it was like a samurai movie. We just jumped from Act 1 to Act 3 with no Act 2 in between. And it works, but it doesn't work as well, I think, if we could have had the extra length. And after we were done with it and it was published, Kevin said, you were right. It should have been 3 issues. I think if it was 3 issues, it would be more well regarded today and would also be trade paperback length, which would be cool. But that is not to be. And I should say, as a side note, this is the first time I got to work with Scott Eaton, and Scott Eaton is awesome. I just want to say that. He really brought a lot to the party on this book. Now, as far as decompressed storytelling, why is it happening? Laziness. I mean, look at this. What? Decompressed storytelling is where you have a scene and you break the action down into ludicrous degrees to pad for time, to fill pages. And what it is you don't have enough story to fill 20 pages or 22 pages or however many pages the story length is. You don't have enough story, so you pad what you have. And to me, that's all decompressed storytelling is. It's not some new addition to the art form. It's not some added value or anything else. It's just lazy writing. It's thinking about the paycheck instead of the content of what you're writing at the time. And now all of this grew out of in the 90s as the sales of trade paperbacks began to grow and comic books' presence in the book market began to grow, editors and writers began to talk about writing for the trade. That's in quotes, writing for the trade. In other words, considering the trade while doing the monthlies. So breaking your monthly up into like 6-issue arcs or 2 3-issue arcs or a 4-issue arc and 2 standalones, whatever, so that when you got to the trade, it all fit well. 6 issues, 100 plus pages, and it made for one cohesive volume that gave the reader a satisfying read. That you didn't end on a cliffhanger. You didn't end or begin in the middle of an arc, and all that made sense to me. It's a publishing business after all. You want to make money. You want to make the best use of the material that you're creating, or best reuse even. And so you want to think about that. Now, to me, it just meant 3-issue arc, whatever. The breakdown's the way I mentioned it. I didn't change the way I wrote. I just thought more of 6-issue chunks. Every year, 2 trade paperbacks. The math is pretty easy. Okay, 12 issues a year means 2 trade paperbacks. And I would just write the stories with that in mind. Other writers apparently took this to mean I can write one long 6-issue story and drag it out. And they didn't even think in terms of acts. They didn't think in terms of like how does a screenplay or a novel work. They just began writing a story and stretching it out. And it might be a story that takes up 6 issues, but in reality, it's a story that might have only taken 3 issues that's stretched out to 3. Now, how do you do that? Well, you can spend 2 panels showing a guy dropping a plastic cup to the floor. That takes up a third of a page. Or you can transcribe a conversation that you have with your sister, your mom, your next door neighbor, and have your characters say it in a series of static panels where they really don't do much at all. Or you can accent your stories, waste panels on, not so funny gags. So there's lots of ways to decompress a story, but as I said, and I will say again, and I will say till the end of time, it is lazy writing. Now, if you read manga is decompressed. They take more real estate in the comic to tell the story, but their comics are generally well over 100 pages long, and they generally make sure that the events in that progression of panels is interesting, engaging, clever, not just 6 panels of somebody, brushing their teeth or walking through their apartment. So I anticipate someday we'll have a comic where the characters just sit and watch television. But yeah, decompressed storytelling is a scam. It is a false promise. Kenny Todd. I met Mark Waid back when he was writing Captain America. He was signing some books for me, and when he got to number 13, he said he couldn't in good faith sign it. I asked him why, and he said his editor rewrote so much of it that he shouldn't sign it. Have you ever had an editor do that to something you wrote? If so, why? I've had a lot of them try. One I can recall is the problematic and highly collectible Elseworlds 80-page giant. It was pulped after being printed because of complaints about a story in which a baby is put in a microwave. I had a couple of stories in this. I think I had 3 stories. The editor said, I want a 10-page story. And I said, well, can you just give me 10 pages and I'll break it up? And the editor was the notorious, infamous Dan Raspler. And Dan Raspler's hobby was tormenting writers. And he loved making changes on the fly, changes afterwards, lots of rewrites. And one of the stories I did, he suggested a story in which Batman's origin is altered. His parents aren't killed by a hold-up man in an alley. They are killed by the crashing rocket ship that contained the baby Kal-El. And so Bruce Wayne grows up dedicated to avenging himself on the character who would become Superman. And okay, well, that's an interesting idea. It's kind of dark, but it's interesting. And I wrote it and I handed it in, and Dan said, I don't like it. It's not funny enough. And I said, I didn't know you meant it to be funny. So I wrote it dark. I thought you wanted dark, not hilarious. And he made me do a whole bunch of rewrites, which didn't make it any funnier, just made it silly. And silly isn't always funny. If anything, he made it more pretentious than what I wrote, because I always see dark as pretentious. So I turn on the pretentious lights, or I should say, turn out the pretentious lights when I'm writing dark. But that's one instance. But if you brought it to me, I'd sign it. There are other errors in there. Just to be a geeky nitpicker, I also did I think it was like a 4-page thing, and it was Birds of Prey, as if it were a comic strip in the 1960s, like A Heart of Juliet Jones or Girls in Apartment 3G. In fact, I think I even called it like The Vigilantes in Apartment D. And it represented a week of dailies and then a Sunday. And they didn't really tell a story. They told part of a story. And I thought it was really cute. And Enrique Villagran did an awesome job of aping that 60s soap opera comic strip style. The only problem with it is the gag fell flat because they printed the dailies in color. They had them colored in. And in the script, I made it clear that these daily strips should be in black and white. And if there's any color, it should be like a pale yellow color, like a mottled yellow color, to make it appear as though they were clipped out of a newspaper. But they were printed in color, and as I said, the gag just falls completely flat because you don't understand that these are newspaper strips now. They just seem to be oddly printed sideways for no reason. And so, anyway, that was, yeah. But on the subject of signing comics, if you bring me a comic and my name is on it, I'll sign it. The fan bringing the comic, they just want the comic signed. They don't care about my problems with the editor or how I was feeling when I wrote it or anything else. In fact, I'm often brought books that I didn't work on at all. I was like, look, I didn't work on this. And they're, oh, I know, I just want you to sign it. A lot of times I'm asked to sign the Batman issue where Bane breaks Batman's back. Well, I didn't write that issue, Doug Mensch did. But I always want to make sure with the fan that, I don't want you to get home and go, hey, he didn't write this. So I always make sure that, because, it's a valued comic. I don't want to reduce the value in the fan's eyes or the collector's eyes. So I always ask, hey, I didn't write this. If you still want it signed, I'll sign it. Hell, I signed a baby's diaper one time. I've signed all kinds of crazy things. And if you want it signed, if you brought it to the con, I'll do it. I'm not going to tell you a long story. And plus, sitting there for like 3 days explaining why you're not going to sign this particular comic over and over and over again sounds really tedious. And who wants to hear it? Brian Rickard. Hey, I grew up being a huge fan of Tintin, or Tintin, as they call it in Europe. The Tintin animated series and subsequently the comics by Herge. It seems like the type of thing you would enjoy. So I was wondering if you're a fan of Herge's work and if you had any deep cut comic recommendations for fans of globetrotting treasure hunting adventures. Yeah, you kind of, you can't avoid Tintin. When I was coming up, it was everywhere. It was in every bookstore and library and everything else had Tintin. And it was comics, so I wanted to read it. I'd read anything in comics form. And Herge's work is, it's brilliant. It's timeless. His storytelling is impeccable. His writing and characterization and everything else, it's a study. It's a 101 in how to assemble a great comic book cast, how to put them in motion, his setups and payoffs, his running gags. The Belgians and French love their running gags. It's seamless, wonderful entertainment. And as I said, timeless. These things, in a lot of cases, predate American comic books, and yet read like they were written yesterday. Because, as I said, the storytelling and everything else, it's so clear, it's so perfect, it's so elegantly done that it's no wonder that, generation after generation of readers have enjoyed it. It's terrific work. As far as globe-trotting adventures, I mean, it's hard to beat Uncle Scrooge, particularly the work of Carl Barks. And since you brought this up, I wonder if Barks ever saw Tintin. Was it an influence on him? Because Tintin begins in 1929, so certainly it was around. But I don't think European comics and comics for South America and places like that, I don't think they made it to the United States with the frequency and ease that they do today. I wish they made it even more frequently today than they do, but there's a chance that he saw the work and was influenced. But if you read about Barks and know about Barks, he was already interested in globe-trotting adventures. He was a big National Geographic reader, which I imagine Hergé was as well, or Hergé. I never knew how to pronounce that. So maybe they just had the same influences. And of course, exploration and, documentaries and theories and things like that about lost civilizations and things like that were, de rigueur in the formative years of both of these men. So the idea that they would be attracted to the same kind of story is just kind of natural for guys in their generation. Aidan Belcher. There have been a lot of future Batman stories. Everybody's got their own interpretation of what happens to Bruce Wayne later on down the line in his career as Batman. I was curious what your take on this was. What do you think happens to Bruce Wayne as time moves on? Do you believe that he would continue being Batman until it killed him? Or do you think he would eventually retire and pass the cowl on? Well, I would prefer to think that he retired. And actually, I did write a future Batman story, although it was re-edited weirdly to be presented as a contemporary Batman story. Archie Goodwin approached me and asked me if I would like to write a 3-issue mini that was basically toward the end of Batman's career. An imaginary tale, if you will, not necessarily supposed to be in continuity. And I said, cool, and Mike McCann was going to draw it. I'm a big Mike McCann fan. So I wrote it as a futuristic story. And in it, in the original version, we saw that Tim Drake had retired as Robin. He was a grown man with children and a job in the tech industry. He was living in the suburbs. And Bruce Wayne comes to him for help, and Tim's like, no, I left that life behind. That scene had to be cut in order to make it fit current continuity. Although the flying cars and ray weapons and bionics and all the weird stuff that happens that Mike McCann drew so wonderfully goes unexplained because, that level of technology and weirdness was not present in the Batman comics at the time. The other strange anomaly is that the villain in this 3-issue arc is Hadrian Armstrong, the General, who in the then current Batman continuity was a child, but in this arc is a grown man. So, I don't know why they didn't want it published the way it was, but sadly, Archie and I had to work together to, rejigger it as much as we could after all the art was done. So it's a weird reading experience, but I think if you find it and read it with the idea in mind that it was meant to be set in the future, you'll understand what the hell's going on. And that, I just didn't lose my mind for 3 issues. But yeah, I prefer to think that Batman retired. Maybe after a crippling injury, maybe problems resulting from Bane breaking him. I like that idea. I like the Batman Beyond interpretation that he retires and chooses his successor. I think that's a fitting end so that Bruce Wayne's story goes on, despite his, having stepped back into the shadows. RAF, or Royal Air Force. A few years back, I was in a used video and music store, and in the corner of the store was a single long box with some comic issues inside for $2 a pop. Deal! Among those comics were a few issues of your Airboy series. Well, I'm glad they weren't in the quarter box. I heard you talk about it on the Comics Shenanigans podcast, and it intrigued me, so I picked up all the issues they had. I noticed for a good part of it, you are credited as Charles Dixon. Which brings me to my question. When did you decide to credit yourself as Chuck? Well, yeah, in case you don't know that, I wrote 50 issues of Airboy and many, many mini-series and one-shots and all the rest of it. They're currently collected in a 5-volume big fat phone book set from IDW, the Airboy Archives. And for a long time I was Charles Dixon because I thought Chuck Dixon it didn't sound like a writer's name to me unless I was a sports writer. So I went by Charles because I was young and still pretentious. The pretentious light was still on at that point. So it was Kat Ironwood who began, because she was editing Airboy, who began crediting me as Chuck. Because that's what she called me. And that's what everybody called me. Nobody called me Charles. And so she began, changing the credit to Chuck from Charles, and then it kind of stuck, and then I adopted it and continued on with that. The only time I returned to Charles is when I did The Hobbit, because I just thought The Hobbit adapted by Chuck Dixon just sounded silly. Guys named Chuck shouldn't even be reading The Hobbit. Let alone adapting it for publication. Now, I'm still not sorry I did because it just looks better. Even Dave Wenzel went with David for this project because it seemed so prestigious, and it was an honor to work on Tolkien stuff, and I wanted to put my best name forward, as it were. Dan Donovan. Of all the superheroes created during the Golden Age, why do you think Superman and Batman have been the most successful? They weren't the best written or drawn comics, but they're going strong 85 years later when most of their contemporaries have faded into obscurity. Well, there's a lot of elements. First of all, they're iconic characters because they're iconic. Superman. It doesn't get more simple than that. He's Superman. And he presents a paragon of virtue, a paragon of human strength. He's the best of all of us. He's the natural end of the evolution of the human race, all that stuff. And he's wise and just and everything else. A paragon, as I said. And it's kind of an elegant concept. And the costume's awesome. And the same for Batman. Batman represents the self-made man, the guy who's built himself up from nothing, driven by vengeance, working at night. He's the dark against Superman's light. He gets his power, such as he has, from the shadow, rather than the yellow sun that empowers Superman. So, and again, the costume. If they had gone with Bob Kane's original costume, nobody would remember Batman. But Batman's costume, it's a hell of a costume. It's simple, it's elegant, it says everything about the character, just as Superman's costume does. Now, I know it's rather simplistic to say that that's the reason for their success, but you can't deny it. You can't take it away from them. And together, the two of them form the basis for DC Comics, for the success of DC Comics all these years. And it's a pretty damn solid foundation to put them on. And as wish fulfillment figures, they're tops. They cover the gamut, and superheroes are childhood wish fulfillment characters. Superman, wow, if I could fly, if I was stronger than everybody else, smarter than everybody else, and, just the biggest badass in the world, how cool would that be? Who wouldn't want to be Superman? Same for Batman. Rich, feared, cool as hell. Just the smartest guy in any room he walks into. And another badass. Who wouldn't want to be that guy? I mean, who wouldn't want to drive the Batmobile and have the Batcave and have a loyal servant who does your bidding? And have all of your enemies terrified that you might show up. These are powerful, powerful wish fulfillment fantasies that simply, like I said, cover the gamut. They're more general, they're more elegant than say, hey, I wish I could run really fast, or I wish I had a magic ring. These just work better, especially when you're a kid, that you want to either be Superman or you want to be Batman. And I think that's the secret of the success, the sort of primal desire to be more than you are. J.R. Nuto. A Marvel September 1991 bulletin, it mentioned J.R. was well underway with preparing a monthly series for his creation, Shotgun. Given you fitted the character into your first Punisher Warzone arc, can you shed any light on why it never saw the light of day? Because Marvel bulletins were lies! They were filled with lies. No, that's not true. J.R. probably talked about it. I mean, he certainly talked about it when we were doing the Warzone arc, that first Warzone arc. He wanted Shotgun, Junior Walker, to have legs. He wanted him to continue on as a character. And he never talked to me about writing it. I think he wanted to do it, either write it himself or had plans with another writer. I don't know. He worked so often with Howard Mackey. I think maybe that was, the two of them were planning on collaborating on a monthly series. But as always happens when you're a pistol hot artist, you get other offers and they get in the way of your plans. And I think that's what happened to Johnny. I think that he certainly had designs to create this Shotgun character and guide him through future adventures in a monthly book, but was dissuaded by being offered, really hugely high-paying gigs, the kind that Marvel would prefer that he work on, because he was, as I said, and still is, a pistol-hot artist. And Marvel would rather he labor on things they wished him to do rather than what he wanted to do. But it happens to all of us as creators. We get diverted from our original plans by either the demands or requests of publishers. I mean, every single comic creator, I believe, has projects that they will never get to. There's always things we plan on doing, and we either never get to them or have to abandon them midway because of the demands of either the market or our employers or whatever. So, sadly, we never saw it. I would have liked to have seen it. I liked the character. He was cool. Ian Miller. I was wondering how you approached writing a prequel like the Year One stories so that they feel fresh and have stakes, even though readers know where these characters go. Well, I mean, thankfully on the Year One books I had Scott Beatty along because he's a continuity king. He's an even bigger geek than I am, and he was able to, well, in addition to excellent writing, the guy's got tremendous instincts. He brought along this deep knowledge of DC lore to sort of enrich these stories that we already knew, to add more facets and details to these stories we knew. And our goal, both of us, was that we would retell these stories, but not change them, not alter them, not make our version of Batgirl's origin or Nightwing's or Robin's, but to enhance them, to dramatize them in a way that the original creators could not because of the restrictions of space and time and all the rest of it. I mean, Batgirl, her origin and her first adventures, I mean, she just had to be up and running in order to keep up with the addition of the Batgirl character to the television show. And so there really wasn't time to go into a lot of depth about logistics and operations and all the rest of it. And we also had the benefit of decades of continuity that we could retrofit into these year one stories. We were basically showing their first solo adventures, which at the time they didn't have them. They didn't. Batgirl and Robin. Well, Robin had solo adventures in the 50s, but which we drew on a little bit. But but the modern Silver Age Robin and Batgirl had not had, so would not have solo adventures until long after their introductions. And so we kind of got to fill in that space. But as I said, without breaking anything. And yeah, you're right. I mean, readers know how the story ends. How do you make it engaging? Well, you kind of have to open up your storytelling box of tricks. We've all seen movies where we knew the conclusion. A film like Downfall, where you know it's going to end with it's going to end badly for Hitler in the bunker. Once he goes in the bunker, it's all over. We know that as a movie viewer, and yet the filmmakers used ancillary characters and other events to torque up suspense. The conclusion of the movie is never in doubt, and yet they are able to make you kind of forget that as you watch it. They give you other things to concern yourself with in the storyline. Same for a story like Titanic. We know it's inevitable. It's going to hit the iceberg. It's going to sink, and lots of people are going to die. But the trick is in introducing other story elements, suspense elements, romantic elements, whatever, and give you a cast of characters to care about, so that even though you know where the story's going, you don't know quite how you're going to get there. And of course, you don't know when it's going to happen. And I think the goal in a story like this is to make you forget the conclusion for a while by distracting you with other story elements, character interactions, and as I said, suspense moments, and little bits of business to kind of make you forget, show you what a jolly good time it was to be on the Titanic. And oh boy, look at that dress, and look at that food, and look at that architecture, and it kind of make you forget this. They're all doomed. Because you don't want to watch a movie where everybody knows they're all doomed, and you know they're all doomed, and you're just waiting for the doom to arrive. An excellent example of this, in kind of the reverse, is the movie Day of the Jackal. Very good film about a assassination attempt against Charles de Gaulle, the then president of France. And it's a James Fox and just a terrific suspense film, in which the audience at the time watching it knew de Gaulle had never been assassinated. So we knew the guy was going to fail from the very beginning of the movie. He was not going to succeed in his mission. And yet it's based on a novel by Frederick Forsyth, and the movie creators did a hell of a job making you forget. Well, not forget, but sort of think, well, maybe he will do it. It's, because he's an assassin, but you're still, I don't know if you're sympathetic toward him, but you're sympathetic toward his goal in some perverse reason. It's like a heist movie where you want the criminals to get away with it, even though you know it's wrong. So this guy's so invested and so perfect and so skilled at his job that you kind of want to see him succeed. But, obviously he doesn't. I'm not spoiling the movie. Charles de Gaulle wasn't shot. So there you go. But it's still an excellent film, and a perfect example of what we're talking about is a story you already know the conclusion of, but you're still 100% engaged. And that engaged because that is the because of the skill of the people telling the story. And if you haven't seen Day of the Jackal, it's Day of the Jackal. I urge you to watch it. It is a good one. It is a goodie. Wilson Chang, question. Inflation has been running rampant over the past year. How do you, as a creator, deal with inflation when it comes to compensation? A lot of times people ask me questions about things. I didn't think about this. Of course, inflation is in the news. Inflation is evident everywhere, from when you go to fill up the gas tank to go to the grocery store. We've all seen the I did that stickers, I think, at the gas pumps. But how do I, as a comic book creator, deal with that? Well, I can't raise my rates. You can't just say, hey, because of inflation, you're going to have to pay me more to do this. Because a lot of the rates are set, or I'm paid in different ways than rates. But in a way, I'm inflation proof, because a lot of what I make comes from royalties, from things I've either done in the past or things I'm currently doing for which I take no advance money, and I'm paid only in royalties. And if you don't know this, and you should if you're a freelancer, royalties are taxed at a lower rate than income. So, little inside baseball tip for you. The IRS probably prefer you didn't know. But yeah, you're taxed at a much lower rate. So, because I own a percentage of things, like the novels that I write, and think characters like Bane at DC, because I own a straight percentage, as the price of those items rise, as the price of the books or the price of action figures rise, my percentage of that rises. So in a way, well, not in a way, very directly, royalty payments are a hedge against inflation because they go up at the same rate as inflation. My straight percentage of whatever is sold is in the figures. So there you go. What you reading? Well, I'm just going to tell you what I'm reading right now. I'm not going to go into a long list like I did last time, but currently I am reading The Silver Age, World's Finest, Omnibus Volume 2. Well, Chuck, why are you reading that? I don't know. I want to cleanse the palate. I just wanted to read some comics, like I read when I was a kid. Something simple. Not necessarily, well, not at all thought-provoking. just meat and potatoes, Batman and Superman facing, weird alien menaces, issue after issue. And I hadn't read a lot of these because they were actually... Some of these were out before. I was reading Marvel at the time. I'm be quite frank with you, and I was never that attracted to World's Finest. I would read Batman comics, and I read a lot of Superman comics, but World's Finest didn't float my boat. And in reading some of these, I understand why the 7 or 8 year old me was not engaged by these stories. Most of the bulk of these are written by a writer named Jerry Coleman, who I'm not familiar with. I looked him up. There doesn't apparently appear to be a lot known about him. He wrote maybe 100 scripts for DC Comics in this period. Didn't really create anything all that memorable. I know there's probably some DC devotee geeks out there screaming, Jerry Coleman was a genius. Maybe he was. But you can't tell that from these stories. They're kind of workmanlike. And DC Comics at this time were extraordinarily contrived. And these are more contrived than almost any other DC Comics stories I've ever read. The DC Comics editorial staff in this period thought that anyone over 10 years old still reading comics was an idiot. And I kind of think that they thought anybody 10 years old and under still reading them was a slow-witted child. And they wrote the stories accordingly. Endings they just pull out of their butt. Ridiculous ideas created just to put forth a cover image that might engage the reader. Just weird stuff happening. Stories that just wrap up out of nowhere. And just completely ridiculous, ludicrous premises from beginning to end. I'm going to continue reading it. It's a big, fat omnibus filled with, dozens and dozens of stories. But I know, looking at the credits, that I will be getting toward Edmund Hamilton stories and Bill Finger stories in a few issues. So I'm going to keep reading because I think they will deliver the goods. They will deliver the more fun, more not thought-provoking, but thoughtfully written stories, more skillfully, solidly crafted stories that, while completely silly, still worked. Now, despite Coleman's deficits as a writer, I'm still reading these like salted peanuts. It's still fun. It's classic Superman, Batman. And the Kurt Swan artwork, and especially the Dick Sprang artwork, that helps a lot. I didn't know Dick Sprang drew as many issues of World's Finest as he did, and I love the look of every single one of them because it's just classic, iconic Superman and Batman in that 50s style, drawn in Sprang's idiosyncratic, idiosyncratic way he had of drawing those characters. And from that aspect, it's a lot of fun. So yeah, just that's what I'm reading right now, and I think I'll make this a regular feature because, like Decompressed Comics, it pads it out. Hey, if you want to reach me, it's brunobookstore@gmail.com. Pictures of dogs, hey, pictures of cats, pictures of hamsters, whatever you got, send it along. And I will take a look. Always appreciate it. But if you have comments, questions, suggestions, this is the place to reach me. It's the place where all the questions from this week's episode came from, and it's the easiest, most direct way. I check it all the time. And while I got you, why don't you go down to the local comic shop or give them a call on the phone and order Unprepped. Unprepped is a series from Antarctic Press written by myself and Scott Beatty. It's drawn by Marlon Shoup. It's the story of neighbors in a suburban New Mexico community who are not prepared for the apocalypse, the extinction event that has befallen the earth, and they have to find the hideout, the cabin, the refuge of their crazy prepper neighbor who up until now they've done nothing but make fun of. And so it's yuppies on the run for 5 issues in Unprepped, written by myself, the aforementioned Scott Beatty, and the marvelous Mr. Shoup. So that's it for me this week. I hope this was longer. I won't know until I go to upload it, because that's the kind of video professional I am, the kind of keen videologist, vlogger that I am, that I don't even know how long this is. I'm not timing it as I do it, but I hope it's longer. It was certainly more questions. You can't argue with that. So whether it was decompressed or recompressed, we shall find out anon. Okay, well, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for sharing. And I will see you all down the road.